think about what boards do and then think about your skills through that lens and what your skills are that you can lend to the boardroom. And they might be, critical thinking, decision making, or collaboration. Those sorts of things are just as important as the technical skill.
Hi, I'm Renata Bernardi, and this is the Job Hunting Podcast, where I interview experts and professionals and discuss issues that are important for job hunters and those who are working to advance their careers. So make sure that you subscribe and follow, and let's dive right in. Hello, and welcome back to the Job Hunting Podcast, your go-to resource for navigating the complex world of corporate employment and career advancement. Today, we have an incredibly special episode for you focusing on governance roles. Whether you're interested in becoming a non-executive director now or in the future, or you want to add governance expertise to your career portfolio, today's guest is the person you want to hear from. Joining me today is Helga Svendsen, prominent figure in the world of governance and a staunch advocate for board diversity and capacity building. She's here to shed light on the journey of board roles and how you can best position yourself for success. Helga is a fellow of the Australian Institute of Company Directors, the peak association for company directors in Australia, and host of the Take on Board podcast, a podcast you should listen to if you're interested in board roles. She's also a consultant specializing in governance. Helga is currently on the board of prestigious organization. She is the chair of the Australian Asbestos Eradication Agency board member of the Workplace Injury Commission, and a member of nominations committees of the Victorian Department of Health, Greenpeace Australia Pacific, and Basketball Australia. She has also been on the board of the Royal Women's Hospital, YWCA Victoria, Social Housing Victoria, and the chair of the Centre of Sustainability Leadership. I hope that you will enjoy this conversation, so let's get going. Helga, once again, thank you so much for making the time to speak to the Job Hunting Podcast. Briefly explaining it to you and other people that could be new to this podcast, we focus on helping white-collar workers, desk workers, usually middle managers and senior executives, look at tips and advice for their future careers and helping to give them a sense of control over outcomes. And for that reason, it's lovely to have you on board because many times I'm working, especially with my clients, helping them think about the tail end of their careers, and board opportunities usually comes up as a topic of discussion, and many times something that they want to start planning for. Before we deep dive into how to help them, could you please share a snapshot of your personal journey in governance and how you transitioned into board roles?
Sure. A snapshot of a long and winding road. Let me do my
Yes.
best. So if I think back to what was probably my very first board role, it was probably the student representative on school council way back in my teenage years. Um, so, and I'm not sure what got me interested in it at that time. I don't think it would have been the word governance. I don't think it would have even been the concept of governance. I just wanted to be involved in things. And being involved in school council seemed like a pretty good way of getting involved in things. I look back on that now and I feel very fortunate in a way that I started that governance learning early. Um, through that role and through some others as well. So, look, the winding road, I'm a lawyer by trade, although I don't practice as a lawyer these days, but being a lawyer is helpful, but absolutely not essential. So for those that are listening, if you're not a lawyer, do not think, oh, that's not for me. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an accountant. Governance is for everyone, and boardrooms are better off if they had all of the different experiences in the world. So lawyer, had been involved in a number of different organisations in my working life and different roles, from facilitator to the CEO of a not-for-profit agency to, as I say, a lawyer. And sitting in the background had always been different board roles. So, my first non-executive role, not being on the school council, was YWCA Victoria, an organisation that provides housing and a whole range of other services to women and girls. Um, and that was my first non-executive role. And I guess that helped to set me up both in terms of having an interest in the work that that organisation did, supporting women and girls, and professionally as well. So this is what I love about board work. It's both, your single track professional stuff, as well as gives you an opportunity to get involved in a whole range of organisations that might not be what you do day to day as well. So you can mix that up into a portfolio of different things, whether you're in a full-time job or whether you're building it together with other sorts of work like consulting. So yeah, I'm not sure if that exactly addresses how you put it. Does that answer that
Of
question?
course. No, that's a
Yeah.
great answer. I think what we can jump in now is helping people understand governance. And for our listeners who are just starting to explore what board positions are. And I mentioned before, Helia, and correct me if I'm wrong, I mentioned before, preparing for boards at the tail end of their careers, but I don't think that that's absolutely necessary. So I'd like us to explore that. How can people that are mid-career or early in their careers also think about governance? So how about we start by explaining what governance is and why it's
Mhm.
important to be involved in governance?
Great. And I'm so glad you picked up that about the tail end of your careers. I don't know if you noticed, but when you said that, I wrote it down and thought, right, got to come back to that
Yeah.
because governance is not just for those at the tail end of their careers. I think it should be for those starting, middle, and end of. And that's because what is governance? What do boards do? They support the oversight of an organization. So they support the CEO and the executive team to in oversight. They assist the CEO and the executive team in terms of setting the strategy and setting the long-term vision for the organization. And they make decisions. There are some decisions that are only set aside for the board. So generally speaking, it's not always the case, but generally speaking, boards are not working in the organization and therefore they provide these fresh eyes and outside views that the people who are working in the organization day to day can't necessarily do. So yeah, oversight and compliance, decision making and strategic direction are the key roles for the board. And the board is just, inverted commas, a group of people who are having conversations, supporting the board, supporting the CEO and the executive. And any group that comes together to do that role and to make decisions, all of the evidence says that diverse groups make better decisions, which is why it's not just for those at end of career. It needs to be everybody along the spectrum so that those groups can make the best decisions possible. And
Right.
diversity obviously comes in all sorts of different ways, shapes, and forms, not just age, but that is one part of it.
So, for anyone then who is interested in getting that foot in the door, what are the foundational steps that they should consider in order to prepare themselves for board roles?
First up, I would just say, put your hand up. Tell people that you're interested in being on a board. Tell yourself first up. Hello, person, myself. I'm interested in being on a board. That's where I want to get my learning, where I want to make a contribution, where I might, be able to, learn some new things. Um, and once you've made that own decision yourself, tell people. It is key to let people know and to have a look around at what is available. Board roles are advertised in a variety of different places. If you're here in Australia, Women on Boards has a good list, the Institute of Company Directors, the Institute of Community Directors. So start having a look around at what those roles are and put your hand up for them. Um, do you need to do any specific training? Possibly not at the start, I would say. Um, it doesn't hurt to have a bit of a view about what a director does and the obligations of a director, but you can also learn a little bit of that on the job. So sometimes learning whilst you're in a role can be more powerful than learning it in theory before you get into it. So yeah, I would start to think about what board directors do. Think about what your contribution can be to the boardroom and put your hand up, put yourself out there, start looking for roles and just get out and do it.
Helga, how important is networking at that stage? You mentioned, let people know. Is it still the case that board roles are filled by people who you know, and it's important to know people in boards in order to get to that level and have a role?
Oh, sometimes, yes. Increasingly, board roles are being advertised, which I think is an excellent thing. I don't understand why any organisation would just rely on networks when you could advertise. So increasingly, board roles are being advertised. However, even when they're being advertised, it can help to know people who are board directors or who might be board directors of the organisations you're interested in joining. So I think it's a bit of column A, a bit of column B, doing a bit of both doesn't hurt. And whilst building your network around board directors might not be the way you get the role, it is partly the way you will learn about what is involved in being a board director and what therefore might be important for you to highlight in your own applications. So I think it's important to build your community around that, to learn about opportunities, and to be able to refine your own offering for the boardroom as well. Yeah. So I think it's key to do those sorts of things. But I'm a connector. I can't help myself in terms of those community things. So yeah, I think it's an important thing to do.
Yeah, that's interesting. It might be that because people are connectors, they want to, engage with others. So networking is part and parcel with the maybe the personality of being on boards. Could that be it? I don't know, but you're right. It seems to be very much, um, you know, a way of getting there. The network, even when the role is advertised, isn't it?
Look, I hope that increasingly as organisations are either begrudgingly accepting or actually accepting of more diversity in the boardroom, I think
Yeah.
with that, if we're going to get diversity, you can't rely on networks. People
Sure.
know people like them. I'm a lawyer by trade. I know a lot of lawyers.
Mhm.
That's not very useful if we're using my network to then get on the board people who might have marketing and comms experience or might have coaching experience or who might have sports experience or whatever it may be. So, um, I mean, to some extent, I feel like those organizations that are wholly and solely relying on their network, they probably don't have that much diversity in the boardroom, and that may not be the best experience for people anyway.
Yeah.
So, those that advertise, I would say, hopefully, are knowing that we need all sorts of different types in the boardroom, and therefore it would be a better experience for people anyway.
Haley, I'd love to talk to you about compensation as well. There's this
Mm,
belief that in order to start board positions, you should start with nonprofit roles and opportunities that are not paid. And that will then give you a chance to learn and potentially get into boards where there is compensation for the work that you're doing. Do
mm.
you agree with that idea? Are there other ways around this? And do boards pay well?
Huh. Okay, so let me start there rather than what the journey is. Some boards pay very well, but they are few and far between. So let's look at the Australian example. Let's say I don't know, for argument's sake, let's use the ASX 200. And it's not just listed boards that pay. There are some private boards that pay as well. But for argument's sake, let's make it the ASX 500. Although I suspect the company that's 499 or 500, they're very different to the top ones, right? But let's just say the ASX 500 um, all pay their boards reasonably well, which I don't think they all do, but let's assume they do. And let's assume all of those boards have 10 people on it. It's probably less, to be honest, but it makes the maths easy for me. That's
Mhm.
500 organisations, 10 board directors, 5,000 people. That's not many. If you were going for any other job around Australia and there was only 5,000 people, or if you're looking at the ASX 200, 2,000 people employed in that role, then you might, that's very competitive.
Yes.
And that's assuming that every director, they're all different people. They're sometimes not. People gather roles. They might have more than one role. Now, I don't say this to put people off being on boards. I am, a governance nerd, and I encourage people to get involved in the governance of the organisation. However, doing it solely to, match what might be a healthy executive paycheck can be challenging. And I just put that out there because I think there is sometimes this impression that if I, go and pick up a couple of board roles and, be able to just go to a couple of board meetings here and there, earn lots of money and go and play golf or whatever it may be. It's not always that way in reality. So, know that there's just not many board roles in existence that are well paid. Some of them are less well paid, and you might need to mix those things together. So, and some of them are unpaid, as you've said, often being on a not-for-profit board. Actually, let me reframe that. Often being on the board of a smaller organisation is unpaid. A lot of the larger not-for-profits are now starting to pay their board directors. And likewise, if we look at the private sector, often the smaller organisations don't pay their directors as they're in startup. So to me, I think it's actually more about the size of the organisation than the sector that it's in. Know that it's competitive. Know that those beautifully high-paid board roles are sometimes few and far between. Should you start with an unpaid role, whether that's the not-for-profit sector or not? You're talking to somebody who's got a little bit of bias in it because my first couple of board roles were unpaid and I learned an enormous amount from those roles. I didn't start in those board roles thinking that I was going to develop my career in governance and become a governance consultant and a board director and a kind of governance expert. That's not why I got involved in those organisations. I got involved because I wanted to learn more, I wanted to make a contribution, and I felt passionate about those organisations. So should you start there? I actually think it's a great way to learn and it's a great way to make a contribution. But you don't have to start there. I think don't say, I haven't had a board role before. I can only go for unpaid roles. I think, identify the skills that you have for the boardroom. So what are the key skills that you can lend to a board, knowing, as I said before, that a board's role is around oversight, around decision-making and strategic direction. So thinking about what is the role for the board? What are the key skills I can lend to the boardroom? Think about the sort of organisation you want to be in the boardroom of. I don't think it should just be, I just want to be on a board, any board. You might think of an industry or a sector or a type of organisation, and then start to pursue the board roles. And there might be a mix of paid and unpaid in there.
Yes, that's very interesting. Um, I'm thinking about what you just said and thinking about how people sometimes get in their own way. And, this is such a competitive market to be on boards. And is it useful to have a very thought out strategy in order to achieve your goals? I'm just thinking about the common challenges that professionals may face when they are aspiring for a board
Yeah.
position, but not knowing how to actually move strategically in order
Yeah.
to get one of those roles. Can you
Yep.
expand on that for me?
Sure. So I think the first thing to do is to think about your experience and your skills through the governance lens. So if you're I don't know, comms and marketing person, for argument's sake, and you will have your operational skills. You'll be writing up your comms strategies and briefing people and, doing content creation, whatever it may be. I'm not a comms person, so apologies to comms people who might be listening to this and I've just described their roles badly. Um, but you'll be thinking about the day-to-day work. You then think, I would like to get involved in the governance of an organisation, in that strategic direction, in that oversight type role, in that decision making. start to think about what skills you can lend in a governance role. So your skills, and then chunk them up, I guess. So it's thinking about how can your comms and marketing skills help set the strategic direction of an organization? How can your comms and marketing skills help in the oversight? How can your comms and marketing skills help in decision making? So you want to chunk up. Um, I I was having a conversation with a group the other day about this exact thing, and one of the people there said, "Oh, one of my key skills is project management." And I said, "Can I just pull you up on that slightly? This is not to take away from the skills of project management. And I have no doubt you're excellent at project management person. But for a board, project management in some ways is neither here nor there. It's not what boards do. So have a think about how you can chunk it up into, it might be governance of projects. That is a different thing to project management. So yeah,
Mm.
so the first thing I would say to people is think about your skills. What can you do? Think about what boards do, and then think about your skills through that lens and what your skills are that you can lend to the boardroom. And they might be, critical thinking, decision making, or collaboration. Those sorts of things are just as important as the technical skill.
Mm.
So that's the first thing. Secondly, as I said a moment ago, really think about what sort of organization you would like to make a contribution to. Is it an organization in the communications sector? Is it the financial services? Is it professional services? Is it mining? Is it engineering? Is it aged care? So what is the sector? And also what is the type of organization? Is it a startup, one that's more mature, or anywhere in between?
Mm.
And once you've got some clarity on those things, that will help to guide you where you are looking. It will help to guide the networks that you want to pick up. And that will help, to guide exactly the process that you will use to get yourself into that boardroom thinking and boardroom networks as well. The other thing I would say is if you are applying for board roles, if you've done all of that thinking and you've looked at where they're advertised and you found some roles that you want to apply for, the other thing you really need to do is do yourself a governance resume. It does not look the same as your professional resume. It
Mm.
needs to all be done through the governance lens, and it's probably a bit shorter than your professional resume, but do not put your professional resume in. As somebody who's on a number of nominations committees, and I look at a lot of resumes, I can tell when people have put in their professional resume, and it makes my job difficult when I'm trying to work it out. And you don't want to make the person who's looking at all of these, you don't want to make their job difficult.
That's interesting. Um, these days, a professional resume is in Australia, between 3 to 4 pages long. We try to keep it 3 pages long. In the United States, 1 to 2. And
Yeah.
then there's lots of variations around the world. So, what would you say the size is for a board resume? And also, what would be, without going into specifics, what would be the key characteristics that people can start thinking of in terms of getting themselves ready for this?
Okay. So a board resume is 1 to 2 pages. Don't make it more than two. If you can get it
Mm.
on one, great. But two is fine. It focuses on governance. So the skills that you are highlighting, your strengths that you are highlighting are those governance skills. It'll be strategic thinking or critical thinking or financial oversight as opposed to project management or, financial bookkeeping or whatever it may be. Yeah, it'll be those chunked up strengths that you will be highlighting. Your governance experience should be highlighted. That comes before your professional experience. And even for people that may never have been in a boardroom before, I would encourage you to think broadly around what your governance experience might be. You might have been involved in, governance groups of projects, or you might have been involved in the committee of an organization. You might, like me, have been on your school council, either as a student or as a parent. That is
Mhm.
governance. So highlight those experiences and then your professional experience. Um, your professional experience is generally just a couple of dot points, which can be quite heartbreaking. Thinking, okay, there's my whole career, just in a couple
Yeah.
of dot points, as opposed to really highlighting everything that you've put there. Um, so yeah, it's focused on it's everything is through that governance lens.
Got it. Now, Helga, we can't really have a conversation like this without talking about the big elephant in the room. We touched on it briefly before, but it's diversity and inclusion. Time and time again, I read reports both in Australia and overseas, in the United States and the UK, that boards are not diverse enough, that women are not really represented, not to say minorities. So you're a strong advocate for this, for board diversity. So how can aspiring board members who champion for diversity and inclusion secure positions on boards? I mean, I hate to take the onus away from the leadership and put it
Yeah,
in the candidates, but my role as a career coach is to support the candidate, not to change the world. That's what I tell my clients all the time. I wish that the game was different, but
yes,
because we don't have time to change the game and you need this opportunity now or, in a few years, um, this is the best way to play it. So I want to
yeah,
help candidates on how to best approach opportunities to give them a chance.
yeah. So first, I'd say just get in amongst it. Like put your hand up for roles. Be how to put it. Yeah, put your hand up for roles is the first part. Sometimes I hear, and I'm guessing you hear the same. Oh, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an accountant. Therefore, you know, boardrooms are not for me. Boardrooms are for you. Uh, you know, people who have all those different skills, and they are for you because you have those different skills.
Mm,
So I encourage people to put their hand up and to highlight that they have different skills that they can lend to the boardroom. It might be technology skills. It might be people and culture skills. It might be comms and marketing skills. A whole range of things are needed in the boardroom and are needed in that group for that group to be making strong decisions, which is, part of technical expertise, as I say, leaving aside all of the other diversity kind of traits. So, hello, boardroom, you need me because I'm younger. Hello, boardroom, you need me because I am from a different cultural background. Hello, boardroom, you need me because I'm from the LGBTQIA plus community. Whatever it may be, that to a good board, to an organization that is serious about diversity, they will value that. They should value that because they know that having sameness in the boardroom is not going to be making the best decisions.
mm,
So I would say to people, put your hand up, get yourself out there and start um, highlighting the difference that you bring as a strength. If you are finding there are organizations that are just, no thanks, we would like another lawyer, we would like another accountant, um, with like another person I went to school with, just avoid those organizations. That is
mm,
not strong governance. That's probably not a boardroom you want to be involved in. And that organization is not setting themselves up to have the best governance, to have the best decision making. So focus on those organizations that will do that. And there are plenty of them out there that are supporting it. Probably the ones that are more likely to advertise. So that's useful too.
Yeah, that's a great point. Another important topic that I wanted to discuss with you is when professionals are hybrid. So they let's say, I'll just give my own example. Um, they have a full-time job and they sit on a couple of advisory committees or boards, and then they get a job which doesn't allow them to do that, and they have to step down from all of their
Mm.
opportunities. So I was naive and I didn't negotiate well enough when I stepped up to one of my past opportunities, and that was detrimental to future opportunities, right? Because I was on a
Mm.
trajectory that stopped very abruptly, and then I didn't pick it up after I left that role. Even though when I started my next role, I made sure to change actually my contract with the institution to allow me a lot of flexibility to have side hustles and opportunities like board positions be allowed. So, have you encountered that in your past or
Mm.
in other people that you know that have gone through the same experience?
So it's so interesting to hear that. I think
Mhm.
for me, I've been fortunate, I think, that when I've been involved in organizations on their boards, my employer has never gotten in the way. In fact, my employer in various different roles have valued that and seen that as a good thing. So it disappoints me greatly. And look, there will be some circumstances where it will be a direct conflict of interest. So I don't know, if you're working at I don't know, a financial institution and you're on the board of another financial institution, that's probably a conflict of interest, right? If you're
Yeah.
working at the regulator for anything, for building or for whatever it may be, and then being on a building board, that's probably a conflict. But as long as there's not a direct conflict, that can't be managed. Because the other thing I would say is sometimes there is a conflict and the conflict can be managed. So it's not always just because there is a conflict means that people have to exit. You might have other ways of managing it. Um, so I would say, yeah, if there's not a conflict, it's okay. If there is a conflict that can be managed, it's okay. And for people that might be experiencing this, I would highlight to your managers, employers, leads, whoever it may be, the additional experience and learning you will get and how that will contribute to you in your job. So if you work in an organization that has a board and you are involved, even if it's only occasionally in, say, writing a board paper or in presenting to board, there is nothing like being on the board of another organization that teaches you what boards need to read or what boards need to hear.
Yes.
Um, if you're working in an organization or in a role, and this is just about any organization that wants you to look ahead and think about strategy, there is nothing like being in the boardroom of another organization to help teach you about that future thinking and that strategy and give you those practice around it. So, uh, yeah, like I say, it disappoints me greatly that employers would say, oh,
Yeah.
no, you can't possibly do that. It's just like,
Yes. I think
why?
you're
It's,
absolutely
ah,
right about the sorry to interrupt, but I think you're absolutely right about
yeah.
the, perceived conflict of interest, and, I think my naivety was in not showing how we could manage that and how to
Hmm.
reinterpret it in a way where that was
Hmm.
actually a benefit to my organization rather than detrimental in any way.
Yes.
And the second time when I was able to exclude those clauses from my contract, I don't think that there was any issues with conflicts of interest. I think it was just old policies that had never really been
Yes.
challenged. And I was like,
Yes.
okay, I don't think that this fits anymore with the modern world. And I was able to remove a few things from my
Great.
contract just by raising them and making people sort of review policies that probably were written for a different time.
Yes. And I think it's great if you can do that. I mean, as a board director, I have been, I've raised with the CEO of one of the organizations I was previously on the board of that none of the executive members were on a board and that I thought it would be good if they were on a board because again, it helps them in that experience. So yeah, I just think it's such great experience for people. And in terms of your professional development, I had a conversation just this morning with the CEO of an organization, not an organization I'm on the board of, that the CEO of an organization and talking about her team and things she could put in place for development of that team. And I'm like, how about encouraging them to get board roles? Oh, that's a great idea, she says. I said, you want them to step up in terms of strategy, in terms of, you know, encourage them to get onto boards.
Yeah. Yes. And Helga, so okay, so let's say you got a board position, right? And
Hmm.
they onboard you, which is no pun intended, and then you are now a member of this board. Tell me about what happens behind the scenes and what are the sort of time commitments that people would be looking
Mm,
at when they do join a board.
great question. So, what to expect? You can expect, so if you're on a board, well, for me, if an organization says, oh, we'd like you to join the board, or I see an advertisement, there's a board meeting once a month or once every 2 months. It goes for 2 hours. So, your commitment's just 2 to 3 hours. That is such a red flag to me, because the board meeting itself is just part of the role. Uh, Things you can expect. So before the board meeting, and hopefully at least a week before the board meeting, you will get the board pack. You'll get the reading that is required for the board meeting. There is wild disparity in organizations about how long board papers are. I was talking to a board recently. They had just got their board pack and it was about 600 pages that they needed to read.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
I have a I have a board meeting tomorrow. It was about 350 pages for my board meeting tomorrow.
Wow.
Other boards I know might be less than that. Another board I'm on recently, the board pack was only about 60 or 70 pages. So you will be spending at least as much time reading as you spend in the boardroom. And in fact, you might spend more time reading than you spend in the boardroom. So I allocate at least a couple of hours reading. It's in my diary so that, board meeting will be, for argument's sake, next Thursday. I will have a chunk of time this week or this weekend to read my board papers, anywhere between 2 to 4 hours. So that's the first thing. There's lots of reading to be done. Secondly, once you've read them, you might have questions. And there might be questions that you want to ask in the board meeting, so you'd make a note of them. But there might also be some questions you want to have clarified before the board meeting. So you
Mhm.
might be getting on the phone to the chair of the board, or you might be getting on the phone to, I don't know, the chair of the finance committee or strategy committee or whatever it may be. So there might be some toing and froing prior to the board meeting. I mentioned there you might be on the phone to the chair of the finance committee. The other
Mm.
thing with boards is there's subcommittees. And sometimes there'll only be one or two. Sometimes there's none, but mostly there's a couple of subcommittees. And they might meet once a month or more. So you've got board meetings, you've got reading for your board meetings, you've got subcommittees, you've got reading for your subcommittees, you've got all of that ad hoc in between. Oh, I'll just ring the chair about this. I'll just contact the CEO about that. I'll just find out these things. So there's some ad hoc things. And there is any number of other, you might be going to events. You might be involved in strategy days. There might be full day strategy days coming together. There might be board reflection and review. There might be a board evaluation. There might be, the board might have a stakeholder engagement plan that involves the board. So there might be some key stakeholders that you are involved with meeting with as well. So there's any number of things outside just the boardroom. The boardroom itself is often the least of the actual role. There's a whole range of other things that might come up as well. Oh, so in
Right.
terms of time, you asked about the time commitment.
Yes,
My
yes.
rule of thumb, my rule of thumb for boards is it's generally 10 to 15 hours a month. That is everything that is required, the reading, the meetings, the subcommittees, and so on. And sometimes it's more and sometimes it's less. So it's not always that much, but it's a time commitment. And as a board director, you've got some pretty hefty obligations, director obligations and duties. So you need to make sure you're putting in the time so that you are discharging those duties properly.
Mm. Right. And before we go as well, I think it will be important for us to discuss the risks involved in being a board director
Yeah.
and maybe even discuss it in different segments. So publicly listed companies, private companies,
Yes.
nonprofits. It will be interesting for us to get an understanding from you what the risks
Sure.
are.
So I actually think the risks to some extent are the same across the board.
Mm,
Um,
okay.
and again, they probably, I think, um, apply more to the size of the organisation than they do whether it's public sector, private sector, listed or not. So there. being a director, you are responsible. You are a responsible officer of the organization and you have duties and obligations. And if things go pear-shaped, you're responsible.
Mm.
So that's the oversight function. Yes, the CEO, yes, the executive team might also be responsible, but you are responsible because you've got the oversight. So, I mean, the key things are around finance. You need to be absolutely assured that the organization is solvent. That is, that they can pay their debts as and when they fall due. And if there are financial challenges, you need to be able to, as a board, make decisions about what the organization is going to do. So yeah, solvency is one of the key ones, but there are all sorts of other things. Health and safety laws, superannuation laws, risk around reputation, which can come up in any number of ways. Around things going wrong in the organisation. The board also has oversight of strategic risks. So every organisation should have a risk register. The board should be setting their risk appetite. Some organisations are more risky than others, and they're happy with that. But it is something as a board director, even possibly when you're in the mix for a role, it might be worth asking if you can see their risk register confidentially, potentially, but having a look at what risks are on their radar. Cyber risks, technology risks, people risks. There is all sorts of stuff. And the board is responsible. So, you want to do your job well to ensure that the organisation minimises those risks. You won't get rid of them.
Mm.
Risks are there. It's not about, if an organization has such a low risk appetite and tries to minimize every risk, that is a risk in and of itself, generally, because you're not taking any risk. You want to be able to take measured risk, but you definitely want to be able to understand that risk. And if organizations get it wrong, if directors get it wrong, and there are, there's royal commissions, there's legal cases and so on about it where directors or boards or others in the organisation haven't got it right. There can be civil penalties and there can be criminal penalties. So
Mm.
again, I absolutely don't want to put people off. Being on a board is a fantastic experience of learning about organisations and learning about yourself and learning new skills and so on. But it comes with responsibility and we need to understand that so that you can manage your own risk around it as well.
Yes. I don't think you have to worry so much about putting people off, at least not on this podcast, because we
Good.
we have quite a few episodes on discussing board roles
Great.
because there is such interest from our audience. Usually senior executives, people in the corporate world. Most of my clients are in their late 40s, 50s. Some of
Mhm.
them are in their 60s, and they are thinking about
Yeah,
potentially moving into a
great.
portfolio career, and that some board roles would be part of that, both paid and unpaid or both. So yeah, no, don't worry about that with my crowd. Uh,
Excellent.
is there any topic that we didn't discuss that you would like to bring up? I think we covered so much. I can't think of anything else to ask you.
Uh, uh, actually, can we, what are the, I'm just thinking, what do I get asked all the time? It's like, and we've covered
Yes,
a
yes.
lot of those things, um, like board resumes and how to think about where to look and all those sorts of things. But one thing I get asked all the time, should I do the company directors course with the AICD?
Yes. Well, there are equivalents around the world. So this podcast is
Yes,
listened everywhere. And I agree that, I
yes,
personally did the Harvard program.
yes,
But, you can, everywhere around the world, that will be an equivalent to the Australian Institute of
exactly.
Company Directors course. Okay. So what
Yes.
is your answer to that?
So you're absolutely right. It's not just the Australian Institute of Company Directors, they're part of the international network. So whatever is the company directors course where you're listening from,
Mhm.
um, my view is that will the company directors course or its equivalent help you get a board role? Yes, it will. Will you get more out of it once you're on a board as opposed to before being on a board? Yes, you will. So I encourage people to actually wait until you're in the boardroom to do the company director's course, because I think you learn far more from it when you've got that practical application rather than doing it as a preparation thing. Having said that, I completely understand that for some people, it's like, oh, I really want to get it because it'll help me get a board role, and it probably will. But there are also other ways to showcase your governance skills to get you that board role. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. If you can, I would say wait until you've got the board role, even if that's inverted commas just a not-for-profit or an unpaid board role. Even that will give you that practical application. So it's good to get that training. I'd been a board director for about 8 or 9 years, I think, when I did the company director's course. So I learned a bit on the job. I learned a bit, in other courses, and then I did it. And for me, having that practical application was fantastic. And you could tell the other people in the room, because part of it is also the network that you get there. And you could kind of tell from the conversation those people that were already in the boardroom versus those that weren't already. So if you can, hold off, I would say, and do it once you're in the boardroom.
Okay, great. Great answer. I like that very much. Because it is expensive, isn't it? It's a big investment. So, yeah.
So that's the other thing I would say is, at least here in Australia as well, if you choose the path to paid board roles through unpaid board roles of a not-for-profit organisation, there are often scholarships that you can get to do the company director's course. So whilst you might be in an unpaid board role, there might be other, um, other ways, other financial benefits from that you can get, such as getting a scholarship for part of that. And
Sure.
even some not-for-profits, if they don't pay their directors, sometimes make a contribution towards professional development.
So what I'm going to do is put in the episode show notes the links to the Australian Institute of Company Directors and other institutes that I find internationally. But tell me about your own program, because I can see behind you a banner and it says Take on
Yes.
Board. So if you're listening to the podcast on your app, you can't see it. What is Take on Board? Is it a course?
It's a course, it's a podcast, it's a community. So it's, for me, when I started running my own business, I'd been on boards before I was running my own business. And for years, possibly much like you, people would come to me and say, oh, can you have a coffee with Mary? She wants to talk about getting on a board. Can you have a coffee with Joan? Can you have a coffee with? And I'm very happy to do that. But then I thought, well, what if I brought these women together? Because the programs I do are only for women and gender diverse people. What if I brought those people together so that they could learn together, they could cheer squad each other, they could support each other and be a bit of a brains trust for each other. And I could help facilitate that learning, but it's group learning rather than individual learning. Back to what I was saying earlier, I'm a connector, I'm a community builder. Like, I think we're always stronger together. So I wanted to bring that community to it. So I created a program called Kickstarter to get women into the boardroom. And people started doing it. And then they started getting board roles. So then I created the Take on Board Accelerator program, which is a small group program for people who are in the boardroom. And it's like your own personal brains trust group. You have a small group that you nut out some of the challenges of being on a board. So there's a couple of programs as part of Take on Board. There is the podcast, if I can give myself a plug. It's a pretty good way of learning about governance. So if people are interested in boards and hearing about different challenges or governance issues, or about different people's stories, journeys to the boardroom, you need to Take on Board. And it's a community. We have events. There is a very active Facebook group where people can pose questions and so on, and people chime in and help out. There's, a LinkedIn group and so on. So it's all of those things. It's the podcast, it's programs, it's events, and it's a community that comes together to cheer squad each other and help each other out, and to have that collective wisdom to help us all be our best in the boardrooms.
Awesome. I'm going to add the link in the show notes as well. So if you're listening, please look at the show notes and there will be a link there to Helga's website, which includes all of the opportunities that she has for women. Helga, I really enjoyed this conversation with you. It's been a while since we've had a board expert on the show. We've had some board members and, discussing how to get on boards from their personal perspective and how to then become a chair and the difference between being a board member and a chair. And I'm going to link in the episode show notes those episodes in case people want to deep dive into
Mm.
this whole idea. But it's really wonderful to have you and being able to ask you and actually validate some of my own thinking. My role as a career coach is to get people into operational roles and executive roles, but and I usually save some of the time I spend with my clients to help them think about what will happen towards the end of their careers. I'd like to now start talking to them about bringing the board experience forward so that it enables them to have this opportunity to be part
Yeah.
of the decision making and the steering of organizations that they feel passionate about. So thank you for that.
Can I add one more thing on that?
Sure.
Um, if I think so, my first CEO role, when I was being interviewed for that, I was being interviewed by the board of that organization, by the chair, the deputy chair, and one other person. I had been on boards prior.
Mm.
And I didn't join boards for this reason, but I had been on boards prior. So I could say to that interview panel, um, I know what it's like to be on your side of the table. I know what it's like to have a CEO who meets the needs of a board and writes reports that are really helpful for the board, who keeps them in the loop about things, who, gives them a head, no surprises, gives them a heads up when things are going well and when things are not going so well. I know what
Mm.
it's like to be on your side of the table. And as I say, I didn't join a board so that I could get a CEO role down the track. But having that board experience helped me to get that CEO role because the board knew that I understood it both from the kind of operational side and from the governance side. So if people are looking to access, I guess, executive leadership, being on a board can be a great way of showcasing your skills as well, because, and particularly if you're looking at the CEO roles, you're going to be interviewed by the board. That's who will be interviewing you for the role. So if you can say to them,
Absolutely.
you understand what their role is, that is going to help you to get to those C-suite roles as well as beyond C-suite, what roles for that portfolio career.
It's such a great recommendation. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that insight. And yes, that's a great answer. If you're listening, keep that on file so that you can use it in the future. Elias, thank you so much once again for joining me. And I hope we can keep in touch and hopefully bring you back in the future to talk about the future of board positions. Who knows? Things change all the time. So we may need to talk to you again in a couple of years.
Always happy to share. Thank you so much for having me on the show today.
I really enjoyed my conversation with Helga. In this episode, we've entered into an area of the corporate world that many aspire to reach, but might not know where to start. Board position are challenging. So it's important for you to be aware of that and be prepared if this is part of your career goals. If you're considering board roles or simply want to understand the path to board roles, I have 3 more episodes on the podcast that I believe you should listen to, and I have added the links to them in the show notes below. In case you're on your podcast app and you can go to them straight away, they are episodes 56, 104, and 105. Helga's insights have been invaluable, so in the episode show notes, you can also find a link to her website to learn more about her podcast and the community she has created for female board members. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I hope that you have found this conversation enlightening and that it helps you on your path to your board role. If you want to always be connected with the Job Hunting Podcast, remember to press follow wherever you found this. Sometimes it's called subscribe button. So wherever you're listening, whatever podcast app you have, or if you're on YouTube, press follow and keep in touch with us. If you're really serious about your career advancement, then take the next step and join thousands of other professionals around the world who are already subscribed to the newsletter. It's a weekly newsletter where I send you the latest episode of the Job Hunting Podcast, plus a deep dive on a topic, or share with you important articles that I believe you should be aware of to be prepared for your career in the future. So don't miss out and subscribe below. There's a link in the show note, or you can go to my website, renatabernardi.com. That's RENATABERNARDE.com. Ciao for now, and I'll see you next time.